Staff shortages, lack of personal protective equipment, and issues around resident transfers as well are some of the problems that are actually besetting this sector, irrespective of where the home might be.
Absolutely. Well, let's bring in now Tim Hicks, who is the Acting Chief Advocate from Leading Age Services. Tim, welcome to the show. We know that several aged care homes have been hotspots, as they call it, or clusters of this particular pandemic. You're accusing the government of not fulfilling promises to provide PPEs for staff and residents. Is that right?
Look, I wouldn't say that we're accusing anyone. I think what's happening in Victoria at the moment, particularly in aged care services, is an absolute tragedy. And our heart goes out to the residents and their families, and heartfelt thanks to everyone who's involved in protecting them, from the staff of those services to the public servants and other government officials that are doing their best to provide support. So it's not about accusing anyone. Everyone's doing their best, but we need to recognise that there are gaps in the services that have been announced, and there are other issues that haven't been addressed. So those issues include masks not being delivered, people being turned away when they request masks and running out, and issues like waiting days to be contacted by the PHU to undertake contact tracing. Now, we recognise that this is because the system as a whole is under immense pressure, and what we're asking for is some urgent action to recognise and address these issues.
All right, just the simple fact of that providers have been turned away when they're asking for PPEs, simple protection here, PPEs here. Why is that happening? Is there a breakdown in communication, administration?
Well, frankly, we're not sure, and we've been asking that question. It's not clear to us what's actually going wrong. The guidelines from government appear to have been very clear. You should be wearing a mask if you're working in an aged care service, and aged care services should be contacting the National Stockpile for access to masks if they are in danger of running out. So we can't fathom actually why some of these services have been turned away, and that's one of the things we're hoping the government will help us address.
I want to talk about staffing as well. That's another issue that's been a real problem for the aged care homes, of course. Now, to minimise cross-infection risk, casual staff have not been allowed to work on various sites, but this has led to staff shortages. Am I right?
Well, that's exactly right. So, for a long time, the sector has recognised the risk of staff working across multiple sites, and they've done their best to minimise that within the existing funding and industrial relations framework that they have. So back in March, services were surveying their staff, finding out who's working across multiple sites and offering them shifts at a single service to make sure they're not financially worse off. But what we've seen in Melbourne recently is an amplification of those efforts, given the severity of the outbreak that we're seeing. And what that's doing is as staff are moving to work at a single service, the other service where they were previously offering shifts is finding gaps. One service is saying that they've lost 38 shifts over a fortnight, and given the overall staffing situation in Victoria, it's not clear how they're going to be able to fill those. So I think we need to recognise that in trying to achieve the objective of reducing cross-infection risk and having everyone working at a single site, sometimes services are going to have to accept that risk so they have enough staff to actually provide care in the first place.
Something I found interesting was the current procedure in terms of treating a COVID positive resident from an aged care home is to ask for a transfer to a hospital, but a hospital has the right to refuse this. Why is that?
Well, I suppose a hospital always any service has the right to choose who they admit. Our concern is that there should be a default setting to admit residents from aged care into hospitals, because an aged care setting is often not as well equipped as a hospital would be to manage positive COVID-19 cases, particularly when there are more severe clinical symptoms, particularly when there are a large number of cases. I suppose one of the things that we recognise is that the hospital system itself in Melbourne is under strain, and there may not always be capacity in those existing public hospital services to take on residents. So what we've been calling for is, if hospital transfers isn't possible, is the investigation of standing up separate COVID-19 wards for older people, for particularly people in residential aged care settings, so that they can be transferred out of the existing home into a place where they can be appropriately cared for with additional resources. And they also reduce the risk of transferring the infection to other people within the home. Now, services have offered vacant sites to the Victorian government. They've said, we've got a site we've just vacated, we've just shut down. You could open that up and use it as a COVID-19 ward, and they've been turned away. So we think we're at the point now where we need to start investigating those sorts of options, and that'll also help with the staffing challenges that we're facing, because managing active outbreaks across 50 sites is a much more difficult task than being able to manage those same number of cases in a smaller number of locations.
Mm-hmm. Lots of challenges there, Tim. Thank you very much for outlining the obstacles there being faced by aged care homes. Tim Hicks there from the Leading Age Services Australia.
Thanks for your time.